Hi, everyone. My name is Nick Harper. I am the Civic Engagement Director for the League of Women Voters of Minnesota. Um, you may have already seen me today if you were in any of the other, um, if you were in two of the three other August Academies today. Um, Part of my job includes advocacy, so you may have seen me in the Advocacy August Academy. That work also includes People Powered Fair Maps, so you may have seen me in the People Powered Fair Maps August Academy. This one is about voter service, which is the other half of my job. I help provide the training and guidance for any local leagues or members who are doing voter service work. I actually caught a message from one member from Duluth, right between um, the last August Academy and this one. So always helping and want to be available to help as much as possible. Before we begin, I'd like to go ahead and open up to Paul and Gay, who are our voter service co-chairs. So if they want to unmute themselves and introduce themselves.
Sure. I'm Paul Huffman. I'm co-chair of Voter Service, a member of the LWV Minnesota Board of Directors. My main areas of focus are on voter outreach and education, candidate forums, candidate forum moderators, and so on. So thank you for being here, and look forward to your questions and comments.
Hello, my name is Gay Clapp. I am the other half of the co-chairman of the voter services for the state board. My areas of focus are actually voter registration and the citizenship ceremonies. Happy to see you here, and thank you, Nick, for your continued multiple roles, and look forward to the presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So if this is your first August Academy, just want to welcome you to the August Academies. Thank you for coming to them. We are hoping to do more regular training and networking opportunities for local league leaders and members who are interested in the work and may want to become a leader. And so our major goals today are to help orient league leaders in their roles and how to access and use the materials that are available to you, to encourage regular networking among local leagues and league leaders, and answer any questions you might have, or get any feedback on how we can continue to support you in our shared goals of empowering voters and defending democracy. As you know, as many of you know, we do have a monthly voter service call. We just had one. Was that just yesterday? Yes, it was just yesterday. Sorry, I'm losing track of time here. Sorry. I think the main goal, or kind of what we had planned for this session, was to walk through, do kind of a more detailed walkthrough of the Voter Service Handbook that we released this summer. This is essentially, if you've been a league member or a voter service member for a while now, you'll have heard, the voter service folder. We've kind of converted all of that to the Voter Service Handbook, which is an online handbook that we think will be much easier. So far, the feedback we've gotten from kind of our test group and the initial feedback we got once we first released it, people seem really happy with the handbook so far. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing this screen for a moment, and I am going to create an impromptu poll. um, really quick. Sorry about that. Had to create that poll really quick. So I had actually originally planned on doing this, but then we did this in the advocacy um, August Academy. So I thought this was actually a really good question to ask, and I wanted to ask it at all of you. Is to get a sense of how new some of you might be or not be to the voter service world. So you might be totally new to voter service, you've never done it before, or it's your first time being a chair. Maybe you've been a local on a local voter service task force, but this is maybe only your second year. Or maybe you've been doing it for a very long time. So if folks would just answer the poll, and that way we can get a kind of a sense of where people are at and how long they've been doing some of this work. That will is just super useful in kind of getting a picture of who we are and how new we are to things. Awesome. It looks like everybody has voted, so I will end the poll and I will share the results. So it looks like about 3 of us are feeling totally new, 6 are feeling relatively new, and 2 are longtime leaders. So those longtime leaders, I'm looking for you to, provide your insight as well, of course. And if you're totally new, don't worry. This is the place to ask all those questions you have on your mind. So thank you for coming. All right. So as I mentioned, this is really going to be mostly kind of a walkthrough of the Voter Service Handbook. So what I'm going to do is I am going to go ahead and pull that up and share my screen again. I will be able to see the chat technically, but you might have to notify me because I won't have the chat box open and I might not see it immediately. So, or maybe Paul or Gay, if one of you two could watch the chat and then give me a heads up if there's a question.
Yeah, Nick,
Thank you.
I'll keep an eye on the chat.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, so I will go back to the homepage. This is our homepage of our State League website. If you are new, I want to point you to our member resources page under the local leagues tab. This is where all of the resources for our local leagues, for anything you do, any kind of resource we create and make available goes here. And on this page, there is a voter service section. And so we'll continue to add resources to this section. Most of the resources will be put into the Voter Service Handbook. On occasion, there might be some resources that are not in that handbook, but are still available for use. One of those pieces of information is the Martin and Brown grants, also known as the Voter Service grants. So if you're totally new to voter service, and the State League receives a grant from a foundation that we then re-grant to local leagues for use for their local voter service work. So voter registration, candidate forms, that kind of thing. And so there is the instructions, the actual application form, the report form, and then there's also there is this page that Kristen put together, which is we have some kind of template, banners, tablecloths, things like that, that you can purchase with that voter service money if you would like to. So we've got, some preferred vendors where we think we get a good price, and also is already set up to, they have all of our brand standards, etc. So you don't need to worry about trying to get the right graphic file to whomever. Kristen can take care of all that for you. You just need to email her and let her know what you need. I I won't go into too much detail about the actual Martin and Brown grants. If you do have questions about that, please let me know. I can get you more information and answer your question, but that's probably something we'll do offline. But if your local league does not use the Martin and Brown grant process, I would encourage your league to consider doing it. The next cycle, I think we're in the middle of a cycle right now, but when new funds become available, because we do get new funds every election cycle, I would strongly encourage your local leagues to consider using it. Local leagues have used it to print things, to rent space, all kinds of things. So I would encourage. Oh,
Yeah, and what I'll add to that is there is some materials, supplies that come along with that sometimes, like tablecloths, banners, things of that nature. So other things that are helpful to have. The next cycle for this will be in spring of 2022, with those April, May, with those grants going out in June, July. So just we'll get that information out to everybody as part of all member news and things like that.
Yep. So keep an eye out on that. We won't go into that because we're in the middle of a cycle and the grants won't have new grant money to give out until next year, but keep an eye out for that. That's what the Martin and Brown grants are. We also have some resources here that were for the 2020 election, or the year 2020 and the 2020 election. So we did have a caucus PowerPoint. So a lot of local leagues do information sessions on how to participate in a precinct caucus. So we kind of put together a template presentation for folks. We'll update that for the 2022 cycle. We also had a specific web page up for the presidential nominating primary because that was new to Minnesota in 2020. It's still available through the voter service page. We took it down from the public facing section of the page because we're obviously not in the middle of a presidential election, but when 2024 rolls through, we'll probably update that page and have it ready with all the new dates and information. So those are some of the types of resources that might show up here that might not always be in the Voter Service Handbook, but still might be useful to you and your league. The Voter Service Handbook, like I mentioned, one other thing I do want to show you is if you are interested in the voter service call notes, that is actually, and recordings, that's in the next section, newsletters and call notes. There's a voter service calls link, and you can find the notes and recordings in that link. So if you miss a voter service call as a voter service chair, fret not. You can see the notes and the recordings later. We do encourage folks to come to the actual live meeting and not rely entirely on the meeting notes because there's often a lot of discussion and information sharing that people find useful in the moment. So do encourage you to try to make it if you can, but if you can't, because we understand people are volunteers and they're busy, we do make the recordings and notes available. All right, so the Voter Service Handbook, like I said, it essentially replaces the voter service folder or voter service file that we've had in previous years. Folks sometimes had trouble finding what they were looking for and had difficulty operating in Google Drive. So we've kind of reformatted everything into this handbook that so far people seem to like a lot and seem to be able to navigate much more easier. So the overview section is first. It kind of introduces folks to the handbook and what it is. One thing that I do want to note for folks is that this handbook will be updated periodically with new information or updated materials. So we will frequently be updating and adding things as much as possible. I've actually got some outstanding edits that were suggested a couple weeks ago that I still haven't completed. So those will get incorporated in. Anytime a local league has a suggestion for the handbook, let us know, because often a local league will have an idea, they'll try something new, and it works really well. That often gets shared through the voter service call, etc. But ideally, we would love to start incorporating a lot of those things into the handbook so that leagues, if a league missed that voter service call or something, they still have something they can find that information and that good idea for use in the future. That way, information is always in this central resource. We also cover some of the basics. The first rule being that nonpartisanship is key, and that has a link to best practices for staying nonpartisan in voter service, kind of the do's and do nots. These are the general rules for nonpartisanship in voter service. League members, especially longtime league members, have a pretty good sense of what staying nonpartisan is, but it's always good for a refresher. New people who come to voter service or people who are new to the league don't always immediately understand what nonpartisanship means, especially in the way that the league defines it. So it's always good to review that with folks, especially new members who are joining your voter service work. And these are kind of things to send them to be so they can see examples and kind of better understanding of things. But the overarching rule is that it's not just endorsing a candidate or explicitly opposing a candidate. It also means that we're not providing an advantage to a party or candidate, or even suggesting which party or candidate is the right one, quote unquote, to vote for. Part of that is we do strongly recommend that you keep voter service work separate from any advocacy or action work. The reason for that is that when you mix them, the worst case scenario is that it ends up violating certain rules under nonprofit tax law that would put the league into legal danger. We might lose our nonpartisan nonprofit tax status, and we would no longer be a tax-exempt organization. We would not be able to accept tax-exempt donations, et cetera, or tax-deductible donations, et cetera. Even in the best case scenario where we don't violate the actual legal rule, it sometimes can cause the perception of partisanship, and that often means that we lose reputation for among voters or among candidates. Now, it can be difficult sometimes working with candidates because I have seen many situations where we have truly done as best as we can in terms of nonpartisanship, but candidates feel like we haven't gone far enough to be nice enough to them, essentially. And there's only so far we can go before we're being unfair to other candidates, or we're providing, we're essentially allowing a candidate to, have a campaign meeting rather than a candidate forum, things like that. So it can kind of sometimes be difficult, but we want to be sure that at a minimum, it's really about ensuring that we have trust of voters, that voters, regardless of their political affiliation or background, can come to the league with a question about where to find information or how to vote, and they feel comfortable working with us. And I also have a note about here is that sometimes we get new folks to voter service who end up being a little confused about what voter service is. My test that I use is, am I trying to assist a voter in registering to vote or casting a ballot under current law? So, if it's anything other than that, it's probably, education or issue advocacy, et cetera, and probably should be separated out. So an example of that is one example that might be kind of on that border area that might confuse folks sometimes is, so the league has participated in litigation regarding to voting rights. So in 2020, we participated in litigation regarding whether or not a witness signature needed to be required during COVID-19, because requiring a witness signature would require people to potentially expose themselves to COVID-19. That lawsuit, I considered that part of our advocacy work. The reason for that being that we were advocating for a change in the law. Yes, we were trying to let people cast a ballot, but we were trying to change the law in that circumstance. So that's why it was advocacy world rather than voter service world. Another example is restoration of voting rights. Many of you may know that we advocate for the restoration of voting rights for individuals with felony convictions. Right now, they are disenfranchised under Minnesota law. That's another situation where we are trying to assist people in voting and casting a ballot, but we are advocating for a change in the law. So that would be advocacy rather than voter service. That also helps us because separating those out gives us really clear rules on what we can and can't do when we participate in each activity. So it actually can be very helpful to kind of ask those questions of yourself. And then in general, in the overview section, it's only one link, but I do strongly encourage people to read through it because it can be very useful, is working with partners and with partners and coalitions for strategies on doing league work. There is a separate link in that to additional guidance. And this is additional guidance for that. The reason this is separated out is because this covers both voter service and advocacy work. It kind of walks you through different questions. This section is specifically tailored towards voter service, but they both can be used for voter service. They both are useful tools for evaluating what organizations you might work with at the local level for voter service work. Part 2 is the voter registration section. So these are materials we put together about voter registration and some of the frequently asked questions we get. This quick guide is essentially kind of the basics of registering voters. And there's also links to additional information. Our Vote From Home page, we have put into here so that you can help people walk through how to vote from home, how to vote in person. We've removed those from the public-facing pages for now. We'll probably put these back on the a version of this back on the public-facing pages, but for right now, it's just in the Voter Service Handbook. Also some information on eligibility and special situations. So we walk through eligibility because eligibility is sometimes a question for folks, and talk about special situations, about how to, register. And we also have a basic voter registration training video that's been done. So if you are, if somebody asks, if a league member asks, how do I do voter registration, and your league doesn't have the ability to hold a special training for that for some reason, you're welcome to use this as part of your own training, or just send people to this as part of that training. Send your members to that as part of your training. And we've got additional information about registering to vote. The key rule that I do like to remind people is that it's prohibited to offer incentives to register to vote. So you can't offer anyone to, if you register to vote, I will give you. So I'll give you a popular example. I'm not trying to shame anyone. An example we sometimes have seen in the last couple elections is a restaurant or something that says, I'll give you a discount, or like a free donut or a free piece of pizza if you register to vote, or if you come in with your I voted sticker. So both of those things are technically against the law. So as the league, we never recommend that. And that includes, so, if you have buttons or stickers or raffle entries is another suggestion we've heard. Candy is another suggestion we've heard. You can still have those things, but you can't give them out as a condition of registering to vote or voting. So for example, you can have candy at the table and anyone who approaches can have candy, but you can't condition it on registering to vote. or pledging to vote or something like that. Okay. So that's kind of one that I like to point out because that's new information to a lot of people. And we do see a lot of other organizations make a misstep there. Again, I don't want to shame anybody. I think everybody's really just trying to like encourage people to vote, which I love that enthusiasm. As the league, we do have to be very careful about how we do it. And you know, for better or for worse, it is prohibited under federal law. The reason for the rule is that you can't bribe anyone. You know, you can't offer, the idea is it's preventing anyone from offering like $100 if you vote, that kind of thing. And the law doesn't make a distinction between $100 versus a piece of bubble gum. It says, no, you can't give anything to anyone ever. So that's what we tell folks. We also have links to where you can get, if your local league wants to request paper forms or you want to print paper forms, both the normal or the large print. There is also, you can print forms in non-English languages. So we've got the link to that on the Secretary of State's website. We link to that because that's sometimes very difficult to find if you go straight to the, some people, I think a lot of some league members are very adept at going through the Secretary of State's website. A lot of league members don't have problems because they've been using the website for so long. But some folks, we have heard that it's very difficult for them to navigate the Secretary of State's website. So we put some extra links in here to kind of link people in a more easy fashion. Also got a link to the online registration form if you ever need that for some reason. We also have a reminder, if you are using paper forms, you do need to return those forms to the Secretary of State's office or the local election office within 10 days of being signed and dated. Otherwise, they expire. So we have, that's kind of a gold warning box because we actually have, not league members, thankfully, but we have had other organizations call us and say, hey, we did this voter registration event 2 months ago and we never turned in the forms. And we don't know how to do that. What do we do with them? And we've had to tell them, unfortunately, that those forms have expired. None of those registrations count. If you do encounter that situation, there's, you know, it's not like the worst situation in the world. You know, it's not like people's lives are ruined. There, you know, we still have same day registration. If you turn in those forms, the local election official will actually contact the voter and say, hey, you received this voter registration form, but it doesn't count. You need to re-register, that kind of thing. So, you know, it's not, you know, it's not good, but it's don't cry. Which is the response we did actually get from one organization. So that's what I'm trying to say is it's not good, but don't cry. It's okay. We can fix it. We also have information on absentee ballots and other helpful resources, which are also linked to in other sections of the voter handbook. But the big one I like to point out to folks is the Textedly service. So we do send out texts to folks who are subscribed to our texting service. We'll send people text reminders to vote. And we'll send them texts on key dates, especially in the major election years. And we also have some quick links to the fact sheets that you can download and print and use at your local, you know, when you're doing voter registration. So you might get questions about military and overseas voters, and they've got a handout about that. Maybe you meet a student who says, hey, I'm going to be studying abroad. What do I do? They've got a handout on that. General questions for college students, they've got a handout on that. So we link to a lot of those handouts. We also include some of that information as well in a separate link. So we've kind of got this for students page, which is intended to be more detailed information for students, simply because we get that question a lot for students. A lot of the FAQs for students and the procedures for them. So we have a separate pullout page. We also have basic logistical information. So kind of like a checklist of things to bring, you know, kind of how to actually do it. So if you're new to voter registration, how do you have that conversation? How do you, encourage people persistently, but also nicely to register to vote or to check their registration, etc. We've got some additional sample scripts that you can use. So if you are, having, if they say they haven't moved or changed names, that's great. You can still continue that conversation and say, what's an issue you care about? So not to persuade them or trying to advocate them on an issue, but try to remind them that like that issue is probably related to some election that's coming up. And so if they've already registered and they haven't moved or changed names, like just remind them like, hey, what's an issue you care about? Oh, that's so cool. You care about healthcare. Obviously, Congress is working on healthcare, as is the state legislature, and that kind of thing. So it's just a moment where you can remind folks that, you know, to stay engaged. Yeah. And then we also have a separate frequently asked questions. So, for example, if the person who wants to register is homeless, how do they do that? That is an issue we encounter sometimes, because they don't have a traditional address, because they might not live in a traditional house or a traditional apartment. They might be sleeping on the street or in the park. And so there is a process for that in Minnesota. You actually register with a paper form, and you actually write the description of where they sleep on the paper form and then submit the paper form. They unfortunately can't use the online form. They have to use the paper form if they don't have a quote unquote traditional address, but they still can register with a paper form. And they still can register on election day if they have someone to vouch for them. A registered voter from their precinct can vouch for them. So we kind of cover some of those frequently asked questions. And we have two sections. One, these are frequently asked questions that we get from voters. And then we also have frequently asked questions that we get from members. And so we've got some additional info here. So one we often get is collecting information from voters. Can we collect information from voters to follow up with them? The answer is you can, but you need to get affirmative opt-in. So for example, we do know that there are some organizations who actually collect voter registration information from voter registration forms. We would never do that as the league. We ask that you never do that. The reason for that being is that when a voter registers with you as the league, they're expecting to get registered to vote and that's it. They are not expecting to get put on an email list, to get phone calls, to get postcards from you. They ask to be registered to vote and that's it. Now, you can ask them if they also want to get a text from you, a phone call, an email, whatever. That's fine. But you should affirmatively ask for that information and ask for that affirmative opt-in. That ensures that they understand, oh, okay, they're going to follow up with me. I should expect something from them. That way, when they do receive that communication, they don't feel like it's spam because you explicitly had that understanding that do you want to opt into this communication? You'll get something from us. And then they'll see it and they say, oh, okay, yeah, that's what I asked for. So that's why we encourage that. There's also some limited circumstances where opt-in is required by law for certain text-based subscriptions or communications. It's required under federal law, I think the FCC, I want to say. So that's why we have the textedly service. If that's something where your local league doesn't want to mess with that because that seems complicated or nerve-inducing, just refer them to the textedly service. And then we also have other information. So if you have members who want to volunteer at the new citizen ceremonies, we've got information about how to do that. Part 3 is actual more information about voting. Again, so some of this is really oriented as kind of things you can print out or that you can use as scripts for when you're talking to voters. So this one, why it's important to vote is actually why it's important to vote locally, is a lot of this content was specific for local elections. Because a lot of the time you get folks who are like, yeah, I'm going to vote for president, but then they don't vote in down ballot races. And so this is kind of talking points and ways to frame that, like, it's still important to vote in those other races. So law enforcement and criminal justice, obviously we've seen the last year huge change and debate over law enforcement and criminal justice process. And that is, while there are state laws that address that issue, a lot of that is also managed by mayors, city councils, county commissioners, as well as county sheriffs. Those and to some degree also county attorneys. So and a lot of community development. So like where funding is directed for transportation or business growth, a lot of that is also local. So these are kind of talking points to give folks. If they're like, yeah, I voted for president, but I don't really, like this year, right? Like this year's local elections, there aren't any state elections. So if you encounter somebody who's like, yeah, but I don't really care about local elections, this would be something you would refer to and be like, well, I think you might care a little bit. More information again about how to be a voter. So this is actually something we put together that you can use to help voters understand, like, what are the different steps about how to be a good voter. Make sure your voter registration is up to date. You can educate yourself on those issues. How do you educate yourself? How do you information. So this one's a little repetitive, but it is framed for voters. We also have a link to Minnesota Voters Bill of Rights, which I think we've also linked to on a public-facing end. But these are the actual rights for Minnesota voters. These are actually defined in statute. And then we also have a section on having trouble at the polling place. So this we include because sometimes people encounter issues at the polling place. They don't know who to talk to about that or where to go. So that's what this is. This is kind of like, these are the steps you should take if you're encountering a problem. For something like this, you can even print it. Kristen put together, essentially modified the website so that things are really easy to print and print very cleanly. So like this is actually designed that you can print this into a handout for in-person events if and when you start doing in-person events again. I have it in black and white. It's color too. That way you can just print this and go. We don't recommend printing most other portions of the voter handbook because we will continually be updating them. That was one of the downsides of the voter service folder, is that sometimes leagues were just printing the whole folder and then never referring to it again for many years. They were just putting it in a notebook and then never going back to it. And folks were missing a lot of the new and updated information. So my reminder to you folks is, yes, you can print some of these pages. I don't recommend doing that because we do plan on trying to keep this as up to date as possible. Here's some additional tips for voting and more information. So information about, assistance if you need assistance on election day. So there's some extra tips there. And then we also have more FAQs about voting. So it's not about the registration process, it's actually about voting itself. This is the FAQ for voting itself. So like, do I have to vote in every race? That's actually a question a lot of new voters ask. They don't realize that they don't have to vote in every race if they don't want to. If they only want to vote in 1 or 2 races, that's fine. It doesn't cancel their ballot or anything like that. So these are some of those FAQs that we have. We also get the question of like, how do I get to the polling place? I need help getting there. So we tell people, you know, ask a friend or neighbor. There's public transportation. Sometimes the political parties on occasion offer rides to the polls. So we do put the contact information of the major parties, just so if a voter feels comfortable with one of those parties or affiliates with one of the parties, they can contact that party for assistance. And then we have, again, like, what if I need assistance on voting? We kind of walk through some of those situations. A lot of this is very helpful for new voters who, like, they want to calm their anxiety before they get to the polling place, right? So like if you've never voted before, you might panic about those issues like, am I supposed to fill in every race? What if I don't know anything about the people on the ballot? What if I make a mistake? What do I do? Like you might have somebody who's very anxious about voting, and these are the type of walkthrough information. We also have a section on voting by mail, because we've gotten questions about like, is it secure? And, you know, what about voter fraud? And, you know, what if I want to change my mind after I've sent in my ballot? What if I need to hand deliver it, but I can't do it myself because, you know, I got COVID, you know, 3 days before the election, I got COVID. What do I do? So like, these are the types of things that we're also trying to help give answers to. So a lot of these answers are here, you know, and if you can't find an answer, I want to be clear, if you can't find an answer in the handbook, still email me, right? You know, don't email me right off the bat. I do hope everyone will put like a good faith effort into trying to find the answer by themselves. But if you've looked and you can't find the answer, feel free to email me or call the office. We'll still help you. Often we get questions that we realize we need to add to the FAQ. Once we get it 2 or 3 times, we realize we need to add it. If you can't find the answers to the questions you're looking for, let us know. There is also the section on candidate forums. So how to actually plan a candidate event, all kinds of tips. So, you know, reviewing nonpartisan best practices. There's also special, in addition to the general staying nonpartisan and voter service, there's also one specific for moderators and a specific one for the event itself, you know, doing nonpartisanship in event planning. There's also kind of pre-planning and goal setting, an event planning checklist, which you can download as a Word document and change if you want. It's just kind of like a template. There's also links to relevant policies related to candidate forums and things like that. And eventually we hope on adding best practices for doing virtual, in-person or Zoom forums. So, you know, a lot of leagues had to do virtual forums because of COVID. And so we're hoping to finally put together some best practices so that leagues can have some guidance if they're looking for information on that. And also a land acknowledgement statement. Some leagues during some events have done land acknowledgement statements, which is a statement acknowledging that the event is taking place on land that was tribal lands. So we'll hopefully have something like that coming in soon. And then some other downloadables like a sign-in sheet, a crowd release notice. So the crowd release notice is if you're going to be doing some recording, we recommend, it's not required, but we recommend that you put a notice up just so that people don't get upset when they find out later that, oh, I showed up on camera and I didn't want to be on camera. Lots of resources on the actual event planning, some additional guidance for candidate forums during COVID-19, information on question writing and facilitation. We have a basic candidate forum question bank. This probably could be updated, and we're always trying to add and update stuff, but this will give you a question bank to start with. if you need a couple starter questions. Communication info as well. And we go through a lot of this in the actual candidate forum training. So a lot of this is part of that training. So we do encourage people to go to that training. The moderator training, some of these tools are, if you need a moderator list, let us know. We don't put it on the website because it has people's personal contact information. And then we have some tools for moderators. We do not have, I want to be clear that this is not, the moderator stuff is not stuff that you can take and just start without training. We do have moderator training, and so this section is not like a, just pick it up and start and be a moderator. There is specific training. This is just the places where those moderators find those tools after the training. And I would say, if you try to be a moderator based off of just this information and having not gone to the training, frankly, you will fail terribly as a moderator. Like, I'm not trying to scare people, but trying to be very clear, moderating is very hard. We get a lot of people who come to moderator training and then realize it's more work than they thought. And so I'm just trying to tailor people's expectations on that. Yes, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Yeah, Nick had some really great words to say about moderator training yesterday on our voter service call. So if those of you who were on that, I apologize for repeating. But moderating candidate forums and how we conduct candidate forums is really one of our core functions, core activities as the League of Women Voters Minnesota. We do many candidate forums. Doing that in a professional, nonpartisan, respectful way is just absolutely critical. It's something people can learn to do, but as Nick says, it takes a little time to do that because you can get thrown into some very heated conversations and issues and discussion. So how to handle that, how to present the question in a way that is as even-handed as possible. So a question about when we're going to have training. That's going to be our early 2022. We looked at doing some training this year yet before the election. And what we decided was that we just didn't have time to update the training materials, schedule and arrange the training in a time frame that would be useful to leagues that are doing candidate forums this fall. We do want to make sure that we incorporate, I think Nick talked about this, and I know Laura talked about it this morning on the leadership call. We want to incorporate lessons learned on virtual candidate forums, how to incorporate that, how to incorporate remotely submitted questions, because that's something that many of us have been doing. And also just update our materials. So there's a little bit of time with that. So look for after the first of the year, we will, and I've got to work with Laura on this. I'm picking up the moderator training from Laura, at least the coordinating and organizing that. We'll have sessions all around the state, multiple sessions. We will have some after, basically after Easter, because we know there's a lot of folks who head south for a good part of the winter and who are also candidate forums moderators. So we want to make sure we have an opportunity for them. So a bit of coordinating and organizing planning to go with that. So there will be an email going out to the voter service leaders here in the next day or so to outline that. One thing I'll just mention with this is that with this planning of moderator training, we're going through and just validating our list of moderators. As I mentioned yesterday on our voter service call, and all of us have seen this, that so much has changed due to COVID and the pandemic, and people are in different patterns and they've stopped doing things they were always doing because they couldn't do it, and they're not going to go back to it, whether it's hobbies or jobs or other things. So, we have just an initial spot check. Probably 20% of the people we've looked at in an initial sample are no longer moderators. So that means that we may not have the capacity that we thought. And so we want to make sure we got sufficient capacity to support candidate forums next year and then in the future. And at the same time, we have the right number of moderators so people have an opportunity to be actively engaged in moderating candidate forums so they can develop those skills and experience. Obviously, as I said yesterday, the first candidate forum we throw you into is not going to be for the mayor of Minneapolis. You're going to probably do a few candidate forums before that, before you get to that point. So yeah, probably more than what you were asking for, Patsy, but that's kind of when we're going to do the next moderator training, what the content will be. There's a few other questions from the voter service call yesterday that I'm following up on, and that'll be part of the planning.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, there's also, again, communication section on candidate forums. So this is where tips on communicating with the candidates, if you're co-sponsoring it with another organization, publicity and media outreach, graphics, including name placards, signs, etc., directional arrow signs, if you need to point people in the right direction to the actual forum room. So all that's in this communication section. And then we also have an FAQ section specific to candidate forums. So one we have is, if you have a security concern about your candidate forum, which actually did happen a couple years ago with a local league, they had to do it was just a very unusual circumstance, and it was difficult, but they got through it and they actually did really well. But if you do have a security concern with your candidate forum, please reach out to the state office. In general, you'll need to do a lot of planning ahead. That's all I can tell you. The specific advice will depend necessarily on the specific situation and what the security concern is. But there's also other information like, when might there be a conflict of interest for a moderator? Can you hold a primary forum? So that's a question we've gotten before, because it seems like that might be a partisan activity. Interestingly enough, it's not under the IRS rules. And the reason for that is we're not promoting that particular party. We are holding a candidate forum for a particular race that just happens to be limited to that party. And so if you hold a primary for a DFL or a candidate forum for a DFL primary, that's totally fine. We would recommend you also do one for a Republican primary too. If there is a primary race, maybe on the Republican side, they're running unopposed, so it's not needed. But so that's an answer. Another question we've gotten is about sheriffs and whether or not they can wear their uniform to a candidate forum. And so our suggestion there is we try not to give any appearance of advantage in any candidate forum. That includes, a candidate can talk about being an incumbent, but we wouldn't want them to show up in their uniform and their sheriff badge, for example. The idea is that visual is kind of, there's a weird visual advantage because that uniform and badge is not available to the other candidates. So we would encourage folks to show up in civilian clothing. So we answer that question. Another common question we get is, can we partner with a union for a forum? You can, but only if that union, we do say a union's not an ideal partner. This is teachers union because that's typically what the situation is about. Typically it's about a school board forum. But whatever union it is, they're not an ideal partner, but they can be appropriate in certain circumstances. But they can't endorse anyone before the forum, right? It would make no sense for that partner to have already endorsed a candidate before the candidate forum. So we kind of walk people through that. And so we've got some advice on introducing candidates, etc. Yes. And then the next section is Vote 411 and voter guides. So you may remember last year we participated in Vote 411 and did a voter guide, a statewide voter guide that did basically 99.5% of races in the state. And we aren't doing that at the state level. Local leagues are more than welcome to use Vote 411. They would need to work with the National League directly to do that. And they have a form that they fill out if you're interested. If your local league plans on using Vote 411 for the general election this year, you need to contact them yesterday because you're running out of time. Sometimes local leagues do printed voter guides. You're also welcome to do that. We provide some guidance and best practices on how to do that and keep it nonpartisan. This looks very lengthy, but that's because, I mean, it is, but that's because voter guides often are some of the places where things can run awry. And so we give lots of clear, like, best ways to do voter guides in that sense. And if you are using Vote 411 or we're hoping to do Vote 411 statewide next year, we've got some sample messaging that you can use to advertise in your local newsletter or for social media, etc. And then there's an appendix, which is basically, we call it locations and master event list. It's basically, if you're trying to think of ideas of where to do voter registration, this is a list of all kinds of ideas that we've heard from other local leagues that they've done. So their fairs or parties, their music festivals, sporting events, general locations. Weirdly enough, I do not see farmers markets on here, which is a key one. So I'll make sure to get farmers markets added. Yeah, so that's the Voter Service Handbook. We're hoping that this format with the links is much easier for folks to use. So far, the feedback has been that it is much easier to use and navigate. We also, again, this is easier for the state staff and the state league to update. So we'll try to keep things up to date as much as possible. And again, often, local leagues try something new and they find out that it works really well. Don't lock that information away. Share that with us. We want to be able to create something so that other local leagues can replicate that great work and reach greater voter service or new heights, so to speak, in their own local leagues. So does anyone have any questions about the handbook or questions about voter service in general, something we might have missed, anything? This is the time to ask. All right. I don't see any questions in the chat or any hands raised. Paul, Gay, do either of you have any final comments for folks?
Nick,
Sue's got her hand up.
Nick,
Oh,
I thought I heard it. I couldn't figure out how to do the chat, so.
that's okay. No, this is good.
I thought I heard you say that there is a question bank somewhere here for candidate forums. Is it in here, or where do you find the question bank? Doesn't the state have one?
Yes, so it's in the Part 4 candidate forums section.
Okay.
I think it would be in the candidate event, or I'm sorry, no, question writing and facilitating. That link right there. And that will take you to basic information like, where do we find sources for questions if you want to develop your own questions, kind of walks you through how to do that. What makes a great question, walks you through that. Types of questions, walks you through that. But if you're looking for the question bank, there is a download where you can download a Word document with, some generic question banks.
This is Tina. I have a question. You used to have grids for candidate forums. Do you guys still store them on the site?
Yes,
Got
that
it.
is called a response tracking grid, and it is under the moderator tools.
Got it.
Ta-da!
One of our candidate forums appears to have 13 candidates, so we're
You might have to create your own for that. Unfortunately, we only go up to 12, but you can start with the 12 and hopefully just add a row.
Yeah, I think we decided that we're going to split them into groups because that will give us an opportunity to ask better questions, or at least more questions than just a couple of questions per candidate.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Stop sharing my screen so I can see everyone. All right, I don't see any other questions, but again, if you ever have a question, always feel free to call the office or email me or Paul or Gay. If it's not urgent, you're also welcome to just wait until the next voter service call, but also don't feel like you need to wait until the voter service call. Like I said, someone just emailed me today and I got back to her between the August Academy presentations. So that's what I'm here for. All right, so if there's no questions, I will give everyone back an extra half hour of their day. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you all so much for being leaders in your local leagues and taking an interest in voter service work. Obviously, this wouldn't be done without you all in the local leagues doing this work. So thank you so much.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Nick.
Nick.
All right, everyone have a good night.
Thank you so much.